Dusty as a booker, Dusty's style as a booker. Talk to me about and probably how much it differed from maybe Eddie Graham's vision of how wrestling should be.
Well, Eddie Graham was his mentor. Eddie Graham loved Dusty. And if you knew Eddie's past, Eddie was from that era of, really rough, not a lot of high spots, just beating people up. But he saw Dusty and he had sense enough to realize that, well, let's do it his way for a while. And it paid off. And it didn't hurt the business. See, a lot of the old timers thought if you did a lot of this stuff, it actually took the legitimacy out of it. And even guys my age who were starting out, we looked at those guys like, you don't know what you're talking about. It's in a new era. A lot like the guys that are in the business today, look at me, or look at some of the old timers saying, you don't know what you're doing. But we kind of do, or we think we do anyway. But Dusty learned everything about booking from Eddie Graham. And wait a minute, there's some people around. You hear that?
Yeah, one sec. Sorry, quick break there. So the last words were Dusty learned everything from Eddie.
And in so learning, I think Eddie learned a lot from Dusty. Now, talking about Eddie was such a good, what they call a finish man. I remember some promoters calling Eddie up personally and telling him the whole story of how this angle progressed, or their angle in their own territory, and ask him what he would do in certain situations. And he would give them his opinion. He was that well respected within the wrestling community. Bill Watts used to call him. Jim Barnett used to call him. And also the Crockett's would call him up and ask him what he would do in certain situations and how to keep it going. I mean, just because you have a sellout doesn't mean you're going to have a sellout next week or keep it going. But Eddie would figure out ways, and he would do a finish where usually the baby face went over, but then the heels come back in and killed him. I mean, you could do that in those days, and you could still do it today if you did it right. And people ask me, well, how you know you're doing it right? I said, oh, your next house will tell you. If you didn't do it right, you did it the wrong way. But Dusty learned a lot of his stuff from Eddie. And the reason he stayed over, not only in Florida, but when he went to Crockett, Mid-Atlantic, you never saw him on TV. You just saw his interviews. And Dusty would book cards with Magnum TA on top, or Nikita Koloff. Yeah. And who was a nephew? What was his name?
No, Nikita was the nephew. Ivan was the uncle.
Ivan Koloff, Nikita Koloff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and he got those two going. Then he had the Road Warriors. Then he had the Rock and Roll Express, who were already made by the time that they went to Mid-Atlantic, because they were made in Memphis, and they were like realigned in Mid-South with Watts, because he saw what Jerry Jarrett had done with them and got them over. And so when they were leaving Memphis, they sent them 4 weeks of like little vignettes, and they were over when they got there. And the first night in, they beat the Koloffs for the titles. They were instantly over. And then Crockett got news of that, and Dusty, then they brought them there. So Dusty had all these guys over. Magnum TA, he got him over in Florida. He took him to Crockett. And how Dusty stayed over and made so much money, not only did he get Booker's money, he was in the main event most of these big shows. And he would be main event with Magnum TA versus somebody, or a 6-man tag with the Rock and Roll Express versus somebody, or the Road Warriors and Dusty against the Andersons and Ric Flair. So, but what Dusty would do, he would book the big shows with him on top. And from what I've heard, who was his assistant? Jim, he was a manager.
JJ Dillon.
JJ Dillon would fill in the undercard, which sounds about right. Sounds good. Because he would book the main events and JJ would book, say, from the semifinal on down, which was fine. It worked, is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. But everything that happened there, I mean, the major stuff was all Dusty's idea, but the things underneath that was probably JJ's idea. Mm-hmm. So, but he was a good booker, good to work for, and you could actually talk to him.
Now, Dusty's booking style, very creative, came up with some of the best things in WCW / Jim Crockett Promotions, like the concept of Starcade. I think he gets credit for War Games, the Great American Bash Summer Tour. I mean, he's come up with some stinkers around, like that Halloween cage match where Abdullah the Butcher was electrified in the electric chair as well, but and Shotmaster. But Dusty seems to receive, like, especially in the 80s Crockett run, equal shares of praise and negative comments as well. As you said, he kept himself on top. He was always in his name was always on all the wrestlers' lips, even yours. Even if you had nothing to do with him, he would say something like, "All right, Dutch, you got 2 minutes. Talk about me for 40 seconds, and then you can say whatever it is for the Crockett Cup 1987 or something later." What are the pluses and minuses as Dusty as a booker?
Well, I don't remember being told to talk about him. I may have.
I've got a video of you doing it, in fact. It was like, just before I say anything, I just want to say, Dusty, it's an absolute damn shame that's happened to for 30 seconds. Then you talk about something else.
Well, I may have been told to say about that because that doesn't sound like something I would say. But I was probably told to say that to accent how the rest of the wrestlers would think about something that happened to Dusty. Mm-hmm. But by the same token, I mentioned him on my interview, which kind of puts me in his space. So it kind of works. I didn't feel pressed upon to do it. I mean, when somebody says, say this, well, you're working for them. They're paying you to work, so say what they want you to say. I'm fine with that. And what was the rest of your question?
Sort of the pros and cons of Dusty as a booker, because he's, very creative, come up with some great things. Some of his booking maybe toward 88, some people might complain about, and money was lost. And I don't know, the best and worst of Dusty as a booker, I suppose.
Well, I like Dusty. Thought he was very creative. And the reason I left was not because of Dusty's booking. Well, it was really. But they bought another territory in Florida. They took it over. And Dusty was going to call it Charlotte South. And I thought, that doesn't make sense. Why would you go to Florida and do a wrestling show called Charlotte South? But yeah, it is south of Charlotte, but to the fans in Florida, what does that mean? But he was taking a bunch of people and just telling them to go to Florida. And I said, guys, I just can't do that. I just left there like 6, 8, 9 a year ago, and I don't want to go back right now. Because you don't want to go back when they're trying to restart something. Because they're going to have a lot of glitches in the system. Nobody's going to make any money. And they didn't guarantee me any money to go. So I didn't go. That's the only reason I left. I left Crockett Promotions in the first place. And I ended up going to Continental and had a good run there. Then I ended up going back to Memphis.